Chapter 6 Mary, Mary. Halfway down the stairs, on her way to breakfast, Virginia stopped. Mother and Daddy were talking, and she heard her name. I know that Virginia didn't connive the whole thing, Mother was saying. Celia thinks she has seen the old man crossing the lot and going down to the arroyo. Somehow or other, Virginia got acquainted with him, and then this tame animal. I can see where, to a child, it would be exciting. Once she'd been down there, she wanted to go again. Naturally, her instinct warned her that I'd put a stop to it if she told me, and so it went on. It was our fault, said Daddy. We handled it wrong last night. By scolding her, we made it a crime. That put her on the defensive, and I doubt if we'll ever get much out of her. We should have won her confidence first, sifted it through, and then clamped down on it. Can't Celia ever remember marmalade? Mother rang the little bell, and in a moment Virginia, on the stairs, could hear the clump swish of the swinging door, and Mother said, "Marmalade for Mr. Stewart." "Yes'm," Celia said. Clump swish. "All children love live things," said Daddy. "When I was a kid, I had hop toads. I remember I couldn't understand why I wasn't allowed to keep them in my room. So I'd sneak them in anyway. I couldn't have been over 6. Then one day, when my mother had a tea party, I forgot to close the toad box and—" I know, interrupted Mother. "The toads hopped all over the house. That story has almost given me warts." "Oh, did I tell? Maybe I did." "Toast?" "No, thanks." Clump swish. "Thank you, Celia," Mother said. "It's for Mr. Stewart." There was a moment of silence, then a clink of a spoon or a knife on a plate. Virginia took one step down the stairs, and stopped again, because Daddy was speaking. We could get her a dog. That might solve it. "Oh no, I don't want a dog around the house," said Mother. "They're such a nuisance. She'd get attached to it, and then if something happened to it, she'd be heartbroken." "How about a cat?" said Daddy. "I hate cats," said Mother. "I don't think we have to compromise and get any kind of animal." "Perhaps not. We can settle it without doing something foolish. I'll meet her after school, and we'll spend the afternoon together. We'll have a little exchange of confidences, and I'll get all the details." "Be careful how you go about it," said Daddy. "We put her off last night. You know how children withdraw into themselves. I know I used to, and my parents couldn't pry anything out of me." "We may have put her off," said Mother, "but it's one thing to have your child behave like a lady when she's with you, and behave like a dead-end kid when she's not. Can't you remember what Ralph said exactly?" "No, just that she was so dirty he didn't know her. And I gathered that she was a bit critical of his game. But of course I couldn't ask too much about it." "She's picked that up from you. Now, I've never said a word about Ralph Harmon's game in front of her or anybody else," said Daddy emphatically. "I've heard you say time and again that he'd never par anything but the 19th hole. I'd like to know when I ever said such a thing." "You told Jack Newman that last night." "I suppose I took her down to the arroyo and introduced her to the tramp too," said Daddy. "Edward," said Mother, "we mustn't get excited." Which is exactly why I advocate treating this incident lightly, maneuvering it so that the three of us can talk about the tramp and the rat, and so that Virginia can see that playing with a hobo is not the thing to do, and that little girls must observe a certain decorum, not only at home and in school, but everywhere. The way to handle the child mind is to appeal to its reason. Her mind can reason as well as any mind, but her values are a child's values, and when they're in error, they have to be reevaluated. Suppose you have a talk with her. I'll do it tonight. The thing to do this morning is to discount the awful significance or knowledge of it has in her mind. She hasn't committed a crime. She's just made a perfectly understandable mistake. Last night, we put her in the position of a criminal. That'll defeat our own ends quicker than anything. Today, I'm going to get in touch with the Department of Public Health, and they can investigate the Arroyo Bottom. Probably this tramp is just some old duffer who has squatted down there. He may be harmless enough, but that has nothing to do with it. And he may be a filthy, lewd old man, said Mother. We're in the wrong somewhere, said Daddy, or she wouldn't turn from home to find something of interest. You remember that Hickman case, said Mother. We don't know what this old man may have tried to do to her. Oh, this is nothing like that. Now don't you get excited. Oh dear, said Mother. At least we've discovered this in time, said Daddy. Thanks to Ralph Harmon and Celia. And her homework. Curious thing, said Daddy, how she'd keep it from us, and yet write it down for her teacher to read. Do you think you'll see Ralph today? I may see him at lunch. No, he flew to San Francisco this morning. Told me yesterday he was going. Well, said Mother, if we don't hear from them in a few days, I'll call up Ethel. Good idea, said Daddy. The bell tinkled again when Mother rang it, and again the clump swish indicated Celia's entrance. You'd better call Virginia, Celia. She's going to be late. Virginia turned and went up the steps, 2 at a time. She was back in her own room when Celia, standing at the foot of the stairs, called, Miss Genya. Coming, she shouted. She came rapidly down the stairs, taking the last 2 at a jump, and walked into the dining room. Good morning, sweet, Daddy said. Hello, Daddy. Drink your orange juice, Mother said. Everything was all right. It had begun exactly like every other breakfast. Not a word was said about the arroyo, or Ben, or Wiki. Unless you had heard them talking, you would never have known that Mother and Daddy even knew about Ben and Wiki, and that was nice. It would have been awful to have to go over it all again. This way, you didn't have to think much about it. The remainder of the breakfast talk had to do with a man named President Roosevelt. Daddy said he was, undoubtedly, a man of the best intentions, but you knew perfectly well that if Daddy were in his place, he would have done things differently. There was something about a thing called the SEC that Daddy thought was downright unconstitutional. After the orange juice came a soft-boiled egg, and a piece of bacon and some toast. It seemed that whenever government meddled with business, it made a mess of it. After breakfast, Daddy gave her 35 cents for her lunch at school. Lunch money, it was always called, and Mother kissed her, and she got her books and went out of the house, and across Palm Drive to the streetcar line. That was the spot where Ben had said he would meet her later that day. She had forgotten to tell him to be sure to bring Wiki, but probably he would. The meeting, however, did not materialize, as Mother met her after school with the Pontiac, and they drove downtown to do a little shopping and have some ice cream, and finally drove home. They were turning in the drive before Mother said, "Isn't it funny the way you got into the habit of going down to that arroyo almost every day?" "Yes," said Virginia. "What was that old tramp's name?" "Ben, Mother. He isn't a tramp." "Oh, wasn't he?" asked Mother as she drove the car into the garage. "What was he?" "A businessman." Mother laughed, and Virginia resented it. "He's been in a lot of businesses," affirmed Virginia. "Mostly junk." "I dare say. He's been everywhere. Did he ever try to touch you at all?" "No, never." "No, we used to talk, and," she started to say, "play with Wiki," but stopped short. Mother was trying to find out things. Mother didn't like Ben, and she didn't like Wiki, so why should she want to ask questions about them? They got out of the car. Adashi was in the garden, and he touched his cap. "Will you close the garage doors?" Adashi asked Mother. "Yes," he nodded. They walked slowly around the garden, while Mother examined the cannas. "Dear me," she said, "why can't Adashi be a little more careful?" "What did he do?" asked Virginia. "And just look at the rose bushes. They need trimming and pruning. He works here 3 days a week, and I can't see that he does anything except turn the water on and off." "Let's go in the house, sweet." Virginia followed Mother inside. She wondered if Ben were still waiting at the end of the streetcar line. The car she usually rode on would have come and gone, and a lot of other cars since. There was a bench nearby where people waited. Ben might be sitting there now wondering why she hadn't appeared. If she were to go to Claire Inslee's house, she could walk a block out of her way and go by the end of the streetcar line, and tell Ben what had happened, provided, of course, he had been waiting all this time. She considered the possibility, but Mother said, "I'll play you a game of hop-ching for half an hour if you'll find the board and the marbles." "They're up in my room." "Very well, we'll play up there." Ben was going to have his wait for nothing. There was no way out of it. Well, she could explain to him later. No, there wasn't going to be any later. She wasn't supposed to see Ben ever again. Mother and Daddy had taken such a terrible dislike to Ben without even knowing him. She went upstairs, and Mother followed her. They put the hot ching board on the table and drew up 2 chairs. Through the French doors that led out onto the balcony, you could see the garden, and beyond it the arroyo edge. By this time, Ben must have gotten tired, waiting, and had gone back to the chaparral. He must be wondering what had happened. She hadn't been able to keep her promise, and he would be disappointed. Probably Mary Sunshine had always kept her promises, if Ben only knew. "What color do you want?" asked Mother. "I'll take the red ones." "Then I'll take blue. Shall I go first?" "Yes, go ahead," said Mother. The game began. You had to keep your mind on it, or you missed too many jumps. Ben and Wiki were forced back into that place where you were alone, but you knew they were there, and you didn't try to think of them. Right in the middle of the game, Mother said, "Where did you first see the old tramp?" "Oh, I don't know," said Virginia. "Did he ask you to come down to the arroyo bottom?" "No." "Look, Mother, you missed 2 jumps." "So I did. Well, it's your turn. I'm going to spoil your jumps like this, see?" "You play a good game," said Mother. "Now let me see. What can I do next?" "I see something." "Don't tell me," said Mother. "I won't," said Virginia. "Well, I'll move this one. He hasn't been moved much." "Jump, jump, jump," said Virginia. "You're getting that one right down where you want him, aren't you?" "Did the old tramp beg you for food?" "No, I just thought he would like some." "No, you can't move that way." "Oh, that's right," said Mother. "What could you and he find to talk about so much?" "Oh, everything. His wife." "Has he got a wife?" "Yes." "Where is she?" "In the bug house." "It's your turn." "I think I'll do that," said Mother. "Now, what are you going to do?" "You've got me blocked, I guess," said Virginia. She studied the board. "I wouldn't use the word bug house if I were you," said Mother. "It's slang, and it doesn't sound very nice." "All right. Sometimes tramps use words that little girls should never use. Did he ever ask you for money?" "No." "Oh, I see what I can do. Look, Mother. It was there all the time, and I never saw it. Jump, 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 see? And that's not all, because then I go jump, 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 and I'm just where I want to be." "Dear me, I'm not getting anywhere," said Mother. "I'm going to win, after all, Mother, if you're not careful." "That will never do," said Mother. "Let me see if I can keep you under control." The game went on, and Mother did win, even though it looked as if she were blocked. But it was a victory by only 1 jump, and it was so close that it was almost a tie. They started a second game, and Virginia was well on the way to victory when Daddy came home. "We're upstairs in Virginia's room," Mother called down to him. "I'll be up," he said from below. A few minutes later, when he came into the room, Mother insisted that he take her place, at the hop-ching board. She watched while Daddy slowly but surely lost the game. Virginia was pleased to win by such a big margin, and Daddy said, "I'd have caught up to you and won with a garrison finish if it hadn't been for this heavy thing in my pocket." "What?" asked Virginia. "In my right-hand coat pocket. It's so heavy it weighs me down." "Why, Daddy, what's that got to do with hop-ching? What's in your pocket?" "I don't know what it is," said Daddy, "but I certainly wish I could get rid of it." Virginia left her chair and hurried around to him. let me see," she shouted, anticipating a joke of some kind. "See if you can get it out," said Daddy. "It's wrapped in white paper." Virginia plunged her hand into his coat pocket and brought out the package. "It isn't heavy at all," she said. "It's a little box. What's in it?" "I can't imagine," said Daddy. "Why don't you open it and see?" asked Mother. "Is it for me?" "It must be," said Daddy. "It isn't for Mother or me." Virginia tore the paper off immediately, leaving it in shreds, and fumbled with the lid of the box. In her excitement, she couldn't open it, but finally succeeded in prying it loose after a moment. Inside the box was lined with blue plush, and set in the plush was a small gold bracelet. "Oh, Mother, look!" Virginia exclaimed, in a combination of awe and delight. "Isn't that lovely?" said Mother. Virginia took it out of the box and examined it carefully. "It's wonderful," she said. "I should say it is," said Mother. "Aren't you a lucky girl?" "How did you know I wanted one, Daddy?" "I had a hunch," said Daddy. "What do you give Daddy for it?" asked Mother. The question didn't need any answer. Daddy was supposed to be kissed for it. People were always supposed to be kissed when they gave you a present. And what a present! Daddy got a big kiss for that. Not just a peck, but a real smack. "Later, we'll have your name put on the inside of it," said Daddy. "There wasn't time today. This is the clasp. Let me show you how it opens." "Where did you get it?" asked Mother. "Walton's." "Much?" $15, said Daddy. "My, you'll have to take good care of that," said Mother. "I will, oh I will," said Virginia. "Can I wear it to school?" "May I?" said Mother. "May I wear it to school?" "We'll see," said Mother. "Certainly," said Daddy. "It's to be used. There, give me your wrist. It goes on like that, and catches there. Always be sure that the clasp is tight and you won't lose it. Doesn't that look like a young lady?" "It's beautiful," Virginia exclaimed. "Wait till I show it to Claire Ensley. I bet she'll want one. Look how it shines, Mother." "It's very nice," said Mother, "and you must be very careful with it. Daddy's given you something that most little girls don't get until they're in their teens." "It's something like one of yours, Mother, only smaller. I love it, Daddy." "That's nice," smiled Daddy. "I'll leave you two to your toys," said Mother. "We go to the Masons tonight." "Oh, do we?" said Daddy. "I'd forgotten. What's Virginia doing?" "Celia can take her to a movie, or she can stay home. Perhaps the bracelet is excitement enough for tonight." "I don't care," whether I go to the movies or not," said Virginia, admiring her wrist. "All right," said Daddy. "Virginia and I will stay here and have a visit for a few minutes." "That's nice," said Mother, as she left the room. "Did you and Mother have a nice day?" asked Daddy. "Yes." "Did she meet you after school?" "Yes. Then we went downtown. We haven't been home very long." "Oh, Daddy, I'm so pleased with my bracelet." How was school?" "All right. And, let me see," said Daddy. "Don't you want to read your paper?" "Not just now," said Daddy. "I thought it would be nice if we'd have a little talk about a few things." "All right. What shall we talk about?" "Well, I think we misunderstood each other yesterday, and whenever there is a misunderstanding, it should be talked over so that we are clear about all things." Virginia sat still and listened seriously. "Now you know that Mother and I would never say or do anything if it weren't for your own good. We have just one desire in our hearts, and that is to make you happy. And if anything comes along to separate you from us and interfere with the happiness of all three of us, then Mother and I have to decide what is the best thing to do." Rushing around the room went Ben and Wiki, running hard, running fast, looking for a place to hide quickly before Daddy found them. "Yes, Daddy," said Virginia. "Now both Mother and I understand that there are some things that seem wonderfully interesting to little girls, but that grown-ups who know more about them realize are not wonderful at all, but are really very dangerous." Under the bed and out again, under the bureau, went Ben and Wiki, but there was no hiding place, because Daddy was circling around and circling around, getting closer and closer until... "It's about the old tramp and the rat," Daddy said. "Swoop. Did he have them? Did he get them? No, no. They were safe, safe. Safe in that place where you're alone. Thank goodness." Just at the last second, as Daddy struck from above, they had dashed into that place where you're alone, and they were safe, 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 just the way Wiki would dash into Ben's shirt front when he was frightened. So they had both dashed into the place. Thank goodness for the place. And there they huddled, their hearts pounding, frightened and breathless, but safe, no doubt of that. Virginia exhaled a long breath. "Yes, Daddy," she said. "Now Mother and I have always reasoned with you. We've never treated you like a little girl at all, and we don't want you to have to be on your guard against us the way some children are afraid of their parents. When Mother and I found you had been doing something without telling us, we were disappointed. We like to think that none of us have any secrets from each other. Can't you see how we felt when we heard about your climbing down to the arroyo bottom day after day?" Virginia nodded and fingered the bracelet on her wrist. She gulped once. "We understand about seeing a tame rat and wanting to feed it, But we know more about rats than you do. Rats are very dirty animals. This one may be the old tramp's pet, but that doesn't change the fact that rats are one of the worst enemies of man. Are they? Rats spread disease, many kinds of disease. I don't suppose little girls of your age ever heard of bubonic plague, but it's one of the very worst diseases known to man, and it is spread everywhere by just one carrier, the rat. You didn't know that about rats, did you? No. So you see, just to touch a rat is dangerous. The United States government has spent thousands and thousands of dollars trying to exterminate rats, trying to kill all rats, for not only do they spread disease, but they destroy thousands of dollars worth of grain and foodstuffs every year. The rat is simply a natural enemy of man. Are you listening to what Daddy is saying? Virginia nodded, but was inarticulate. Now, on top of that, we have to talk about tramps. In a way, they're just as bad as rats. They're dirty, and they spread disease too. And any man who is a tramp is no good. It doesn't matter how nice he may seem, but he's no good if he's a tramp. Now this friend of yours may seem like a harmless old man, and perhaps he is. But there's something wrong with him somewhere, or he wouldn't be a burden to society. Any man who willingly allows himself to sink lower and lower until he is a common hobo is either dangerous or a weakling or both. It means he has no self-respect. The hobo is usually a thief and a liar, and honest men would be better off if he were stamped out like the rat. All kinds of coarse and rough men, undesirables, become tramps and hobos. Almost all of them have either been in the penitentiary or are headed straight for it. They breed crime, the way the rat breeds plague. You've never seen any hobos, but this one, and you can't imagine how bad they can be. They'll commit any kind of crime. I've seen hitchhikers on the highway, said Virginia, and I've seen Heavy and Tex and Dean and Gosh. Are they as bad as Daddy says? All hitchhikers aren't hobos, but most of them are. Besides stealing and robbing, the hobos kidnap little girls and do dreadful things to them. They do. Ben wouldn't. So little girls must never have anything to do with them, and must never go near them. Now I want you to promise me that you'll never go down into the arroyo again. Will you do that, Virginia? Yes, Daddy. Dean is probably the worst one, the kind Daddy means. Mother and I aren't going to watch you every day. We know that if you say you'll do a certain thing, we can depend on you to do it. Now that I've explained to you all about rats and tramps, you can understand why Mother and I were so disturbed last night. It was you we were thinking of. Will you tell Daddy now that you won't go down there again and won't have anything to do with the tramp and the rat? Yes. You'll never go down there again. No. That's the girl. Let's go tell Mother that. She'll want to hear you say it. They found Mother in her own room, and again they went over the details. I'm not going down there any more, Virginia said. Then Mother kissed her, and Daddy kissed her, and they began to talk of other things. First, the new bracelet, and then subjects that were of no moment to Virginia. And just before Celia rang the dinner chimes, Daddy went downstairs to glance at the evening paper. "Why don't you show Celia your new bracelet?" suggested Mother. "All right, I will." Celia, who was about to serve the soup, paused in the kitchen and said, My, ain't that something fine? It's going to have my name on the inside of it," explained Virginia. "That's right," said Celia. "You better go in to the table now." After dinner, she and Celia went to the neighborhood theater, 6 blocks away, to see 2 features and a newsreel and a travelogue, and next week's trailers and a cartoon. It was after 11 o'clock when they got home, and Virginia went to bed. As she undressed, she tried to remember if the impressive Miss Catherine Corle had worn a bracelet at Claire Inslee's party. She wasn't positive, but she was fairly certain that Miss Corle had shown no such jewel. When Celia turned out the light and said her habitual good night and pleasant dreams, Virginia settled down in bed, wearing a nightgown and a gold bracelet. Just think how Ben would admire that bracelet if he could see it. But now he was never going to see it. Never. That's what she had promised. Never. He would be delighted, though, if he could see it. Certainly he never found anything like that in the junk business. It really made her a young lady. It was beyond the things little girls wore. Grown-up ladies like Mother and Mary Sunshine wore bracelets. Ben had never said if Mary Sunshine had one, but probably she had. What a pleasant feeling to be grown up. Grown-up ladies, though, didn't wear bracelets to bed. Only children did things like that. Things like taking teddy bears and dolls to bed with you. She hadn't done anything like that for a long time. Months, years. And now she was wearing the bracelet to bed. And that was probably very silly. That's what a child would do. Her values are a child's values. And when they are in error, they have to be reevaluated. Daddy had said that morning while she stood on the stairs. Reevaluated. Funny word. She got out of bed and stood in the dark, fumbling with the bracelet clasp. After a minute, it slipped off her wrist, and she put it on the table beside the bed. Grown-up ladies like Mother and Mary Sunshine did things like that with their jewels. They took them off and left them somewhere handy, reevaluated them, to think about something and do it another way. That's what the word meant. Just a few feet away were the French doors, leading out onto the balcony. Celia had opened one of them to let in the fresh air. A gentle breeze was blowing from the arroyo over the garden and into her room. Down there, in the dark, in the chaparral, were Ben and Wicky, both asleep, most likely, and up here a little girl named Virginia was reevaluating herself to be a young lady like Mary Sunshine. She slipped out of her nightgown and stood naked for a few seconds, feeling the cool breeze on her body. Mary Sunshine used to do that. She had been a nudist, Ben said. Just like this. It did feel nice somehow. But she mustn't catch cold the way she had before. What do you suppose Mary Sunshine did about not catching cold? Got used to it, most likely. She tossed her nightgown over the foot of her bed and crawled back in between the sheets. That's the way Mary Sunshine would go to sleep. The next afternoon, Mother did not call for her at school, so she rode home on the streetcar with Claire Ensley. When they got off at the end of the line, Virginia looked around for Ben. He wasn't there. Yesterday he had probably waited a long time, but nothing had been said about today. Claire walked on toward her own house, and Virginia walked west on Palm Drive. "Come on over," Claire called, "and show Mummy your new bracelet." "Maybe I will," Virginia called back. "I'll take my books home first." "I think Mummy will give us some chocolate cake," screeched Claire as the distance between them widened. "Swell," called Virginia. She walked up the drive and entered her house by her accustomed route, the back door. Celia was out, but she could hear Mother's voice coming from somewhere, and in a moment she could tell by the stop-and-start scraps of conversation that Mother was talking on the telephone. In the dining room it was possible to hear all of Mother's end of the conversation, as the telephone was in the front hall. Virginia paused within the swinging door as Mother said, "My daughter has met her first beau, Ethel." But Edward and I put a quick stop to it. A tramp, an old vagrant who squatted in the arroyo bottom, a filthy, dirty old man who had a trained rat. Of course, it was the live animal that really captivated her. Virginia stood still. She couldn't see Mother, and Mother didn't know she was listening. It wasn't nice to listen to people unless they wanted you to, but when they were talking about you, wasn't it right to listen just a little bit, just in case they made a mistake about you and you wanted to tell them differently? Mother shouldn't have said, "My daughter has met her first beau." That wasn't the way it was at all. What could Mother mean? She must have seen this old tramp 2 or 3 times before we found it out. Yes, well, that's the strangest thing. You see, she must have met Ralph on the golf course that very day. Oh, I'm sure she must have been simply filthy, because she had been crawling around in the bushes. And I said to Edward, "I don't know what kind of parents Ralph will think we are." Mother laughed into the telephone, and then laughed again at something Miss Harmon said on the other end. "But it just shows you how children are," said Mother. There was no severity in her voice at all. Mother was talking as if the whole thing had become a joke that Miss Harmon would be delighted to hear. It was really the cutest thing. You know, our cook kept missing things from the kitchen, canned goods, bread, vegetables, almost every day, and it seems that my social-minded daughter, if you please, had, yes, exactly, feeding a dirty old tramp Mother laughed again, and Virginia stood silently listening. "I think she's destined for a career in relief work. Ethel, oh, a decided talent for it. I wonder we don't come home and find a bread line outside the house. Yes, and our guest room full of tramps waiting for dinner. But seriously, I'm glad Ralph understood. I wouldn't want either of you to think we simply turned her loose, but you're so much more understanding than most people who have no children. Yes, quite a problem, but a wonderful problem. Next week? I'm quite sure we could. I'll ask Edward tonight." The conversation went on, but nothing more was said about rats and tramps. Virginia backed through the swinging door and walked through the kitchen. She left her school books on the table and went out into the garden. Grown-ups were certainly strange people. It was a good thing she had overheard Mother talking to Miss Harmon, because now she knew what Mother really thought. Compare Mother on the telephone with Mother when she first found out about Ben and Wiki. Mother must be changing her mind. Not that Mother would let her go down to the arroyo again. She was quite sure about that. But there were other sides to it that were not mentioned before. It was really the cutest thing Mother had said. She hadn't felt that way the day before yesterday. Mother had reevaluated. That's what Mother had done. Virginia walked along the trails through the garden until she came to the arroyo edge. She bent over the hedge and looked down at the chaparral. There was no sign of life down there, no movement, no smoke, and the shacks were hidden by the bushes. She stood there for some minutes. Presently Mother came out of the kitchen door and called to her. Virginia turned and skipped through the garden, and Mother met her part way and bent over and gave her a kiss. "I didn't know you were home," Mother said. She was carrying a basket and a pair of shears. "I'm going to cut some flowers. Do you want to help, sweet?" "I was going over to Claire's." "You may do that, if you'd rather." "No, I'll cut flowers with you," said Virginia. "What kind shall we cut?" "I think some chrysanthemums would be nice. Big ones, and some of those little button ones. And we can cut some asters too." "Purple ones?" "Yes, they'll be nice. And some white ones too. I can spell chrysanthemum, if I do it by syllables. Can you, Mother?" "In a pinch," said Mother. "If you spell by syllables," Virginia explained, "you can find out how to spell almost any word." "Can you? But it doesn't make any material difference." "Any what material difference?" "I dare say not," said Mother. "Suppose you cut those 3 asters right there. Can you reach them?" "Oh, yes, Mother. Here are the scissors. Leave nice long stems." They moved slowly along the path. The basket, which Mother had gradually filling with flowers. "Adashi has done better with the asters than anything else," said Mother. "He's a funny man. He never likes to talk," said Virginia. "I can't imagine that he'd ever have anything to say worth hearing," said Mother. "Get that one. No, sweet, beyond, there. I suppose anyone can grow asters, given enough California sunshine." "Mary Sunshine," said Virginia. "Who's she?" "Just a name. Isn't it a nice name, Mother? Mary Sunshine." "Yes, a bit ridiculous." What's that poem that begins, Mary, Mary? Mary, Mary, quite contrary, said Mother. How does your garden grow? Don't you remember that from Mother Goose? Oh, that's it, said Virginia. How does your garden grow? With asphodels and cockleshells, and 6 little girls in a row. I had it mixed up with Mary Sunshine. I know 2 Marys, Mary Contrary and Mary Sunshine. What are asphodels? They're a bulb plant, daffodils, and narcissus. They're all related. Now just look at that. Isn't that inexcusable? What, Mother? That's a gopher hole. He's a nasty rodent who lives down there and eats the roots of our flowers. Oh, and look at that. What? Snails. 3 of them. I don't see how Adachi expects anything to grow. Don't touch them, sweet. We'll tell Adachi about them. Let me see. He won't be here until Monday. Sometimes I think we'd better get another gardener. Isn't he any good? He's careless. If he doesn't get rid of the snails and the gophers, we won't have any garden at all. We'll see if Daddy doesn't think we should make a change. Cut that nice white aster over there, and then I think we'll have enough. They walked back toward the house, and as they passed the playhouse near the kitchen door, Virginia remembered Dean's story of the conversation of the playhouse into a candy factory. That had been a story about another Mary, Mary the candy maker. So there were really 3 Marys, Mary Contrary, Mary Sunshine, and Mary the candy maker. But Ben's Mary Sunshine was the best. As they entered the house, Virginia saw 2 figures walking across the lot toward the trail to the arroyo bottom. She looked quickly, eagerly, hoping one of them might be Ben, but a second glance disclosed that neither was Ben. One wore a shabby brown suit, however, and even though the men were 50 yards away, she could tell that one of them was Dean. The other one she had never seen before. Now who do you suppose he was? It's not big enough to make a test case out of, said Dean. Not enough men to make up the mass. Yeah, said the stranger. They turned into the chaparral and walked along the trail, passing Gosh's shack, to the clearing in which stood Ben's house. Both Ben and Gosh were sitting on the sand. The little one's a half-wit, said Dean, pointing at Gosh. The old one's a little cracked, too, and has a tame rat. In the white house I showed you is a little girl who used to bring grub down to him. I put a stop to it because one phony move toward the kid would be invitin' the California delinquency law. Too dangerous. There's a red-headed squirt here named Tex. You can take over for him while we're here. It works all right. But the scale's not big enough to carry it out. It was a good experiment, and now I want to try it in a real jungle, which this ain't. To Ben and Gosh he said, "This is my pal, Rudabaugh. Call him Rudy." Ben and Gosh looked at Rudabaugh and said nothing. "Shut up, don't talk so much," Rudabaugh said to them. Then he laughed and said to Dean, "How's that?" Dean nodded. "The little one's pure mass," he said. "He's about 9 years old, and to raise him up to 10 would take a derrick. "Where you from, Gosh?" "Me," squeaked Gosh. "Yeah, where you born?" 1899. "Think of that," said Dean to Rudabaugh. 40 years old and never had a chance. Been stepped on by everybody who has ever seen him. If he ever had $1, you can bet your shirt some rich bastard would get it away from him in 2 seconds. He don't know nothin', and he's afraid of everything. Him and a million like him got to be protected by the future. He'd be in the bottom class, and there'd be some way of gettin' a few units of work out of him to make him worth feeding. He could learn to collect garbage, or clean a lavatory, or sweep a street, or maybe even run an elevator. Though that's going pretty far for him. In the new way, he'd be useful to the state. The old way, he'd be better off if somebody take him out and shoot him. "Me?" asked Gosh. "Complete national social control is the answer for him," continued Dean. "Never put him in a place where he has to make up his mind. That's not fair because he hasn't got any mind. If it's possible to mess things up, he'll do it. So all his decisions have to be made for him by the state. I'm surprised he hasn't made a pass at that little girl who kept comin' down here. That's about as close as he'd ever get to a woman. Looks to me like he ain't even man enough for that," said Rudabaugh. "Maybe you've got something there," agreed Dean. "But you can see what can be done with the bottom class, with a little organization. I wouldn't want 'em to multiply, just keep 'em at a level so there's enough to clean the toilets and collect the garbage. He'd be better off. As it is now, he'll stay wherever he is until something chases him out. No water or no food, or if a jungle is burnt out, then he'd move on. He'll keep doing that, living like a rat, until around 55 or 60 he begins to slip down from being 9 years old to 8 or 7 or 6. Finally, he'll be locked up in a county nut house for the feeble-minded, such county bean't whatever one he happens to be in when he goes completely dada. Well, that's him." He turned to Ben. "This one ain't much better, but is more of the freak type. He could be drafted into some minor mechanical job, or be made to learn a trade. He has to be told everything just like the half-wit, and is about 1 step higher. He's the kind that's hard to change, but once you got him under control, he'll keep right on doing his job, as long as he can eat and sleep. Somebody's got to think for him and give him orders, and once he gets into the routine, he'll stay put. There's millions of him, too." "You been sizing 'em up, all right," Rudabaugh said. "I had one fellow here who wouldn't go for it," said Dean. "I ran him out." Tex came into the clearing. "Hi, Dean, old Palsy-Wowsy," he shouted. He saw Rudabaugh, and fell to examining him with critical effrontery. "Who's this mug? Some new guy?" "This is the squirt," Dean told Rutabaugh. Name's Tex. Tex walked up to Rutabaugh. His red head barely reached the newcomer's shoulder. But in spite of his physical inferiority, his attitude toward Rutabaugh was scornful and superior. Gonna let him stay, Dean, or shall I give him the works? Rutabaugh stared at Tex. You three guys, said Dean, indicating Ben and Gosh and Tex. Start the fire and cook up the grub. I'll show Rudy the rest of the layout. Hey, wait a minute, said Tex. I'm second in command of this arroyo, and I want. Not any more, said Dean. Rudy is. The hell he is, said Tex. I am. Dean and Rutabaugh started north toward the shack, which had formerly housed Heavy. Tex followed, frowning and sang, Nobody is musclin' in ahead of me. Hey, Dean, I ain't gonna stand for no. Show him, Dean said to Rutabaugh. Rutabaugh turned to Tex, walked up to him. What right has this guy got to? Tex began, but Rutabaugh thrust an arm forward rapidly, his open palm straight-arming Tex under the chin, snapping his head back and sending him sprawling on the sand. Tex's shoulders landed first, his feet and legs in the air. Then he sat up quickly, shaking his head, and feeling his chin, and staring up in amazement at Rutabaugh and Dean. Get up, said Dean quietly. Tex climbed to his feet. Who's boss here? You or me? Asked Dean. Christ's sake, Dean, Tex whined. I ain't gonna stand for no bum's rush from this mug, and I... Rutabaugh feinted with his left and struck Tex on the jaw with a right, knocking him down again. Tex yelled in fear and shock. He lay sprawled on the sand on one elbow and spat a mixture of blood and saliva. You dirty, lousy bums, he half cried. Rutabaugh stepped toward him. No, no, yelled Tex, crawling away on his hands and knees. Rutabaugh looked down at him. Come on, said Dean. He and Rutabaugh started north again, and Dean called back, You three guys get busy. Gosh and Ben hadn't moved. Tex didn't get up until Dean and Rutabaugh were out of sight. This is all there is to it, said Dean when they came to the shack, which had once been Heavy's. Not much, said Rutabaugh. Good place to experiment, that's all, said Dean. What we need now is to try it in some place where it'll really work and have a chance to spread. Make a real organization out of it. All this here is chicken feed, some place where we begin with about 50 men. That's what we want. You and I could go places then. Know the place? Over 2 years ago, said Dean, I had a pal in New Jersey. We were all set to let her go back there, but a little trouble came up, and we lit out in different directions. It was a jungle on the Raritan River, outside of New Brunswick. Yeah, nodded Rutabaugh. I know it. Everybody knows that one, said Dean. Now my pal is back there, or he ain't. One or the other. Rutabaugh nodded again. If he's there, he's got started by this time, and we could go in with him and keep it moving and spreading. Continued Dean. All the early work will be done, but if something's happened to him and he never got back, That jungle is the best place to start that I know of. Out here they get soft and lazy. Back there the cold weather keeps 'em mad, and you can whip 'em up easier. Why, in Los Angeles, a man can sit in an all-night theater on Main Street for 5 cents, see a show, and sleep if he wants to, come out in the morning, panhandle all day, sit in the sun, get some cheap liquor, and sleep in the all-night theater again at night. Hundreds do it. It's soft for them. That's why you can't organize out here. Yes, said Rudabaugh, there's a lot of communists too. They won't have none of it. I tried talking to some men in Fresno. Look at what Mussolini done for Italy, I told 'em. I heard a rumblin' then, but I thought they liked it. What California needs is some black shirts. I said, I thought Central California was wine and wop country, and Mussolini would go down big. Next thing I knew, they were trying to kill me. How'd you get out of it? Asked Dean. I didn't. I got out of town at last, but I didn't have no pants. They kicked the ass clean off. Damn dirty Reds. In that house I showed you where the little girl lives, said Dean, they've got 2 cars. I've looked it over, and it's a setup. Tycoon and his wife go out at night. Nigger servant takes the little girl to the movies. Nobody home, see? They have a private police inspection once a night, but that don't amount to a damn. He comes around on a bicycle with a flashlight and leaves a card on the front door and rides away again. He's dressed like an officer, and the tycoon pays for it. Rudabaugh laughed. Now there's always 1 car left in the garage, said Dean. Everybody's gone by 8 o'clock. We take the 2nd car. Tycoon don't come home until midnight, or later, so we got 4 hours start before it's a hot car. 50 miles an hour means 200 miles. We'll do better than that. We can be out of California before the car is hot. Could make Phoenix, agreed Rudabaugh. Hell, could make New Jersey, said Dean. When do we start? Asked Rudabaugh. The first night is sets up, said Dean. Okay, said Rudabaugh. Let's go back and eat, said Dean. If those guys haven't got any grub ready, you can hurry 'em up. They walked back through the chaparral. Virginia had a full weekend. Saturday afternoon she went with Mother to the community playhouse to see Hamlet. At first she didn't like it, but as the play progressed, and Mother explained it, she felt very sorry for poor Hamlet. Ophelia, however, wasn't half as nice as Mary Sunshine, and twice as peculiar. If they put you in the bug house for going around like a nudist, they should surely put you in the bug house for talking gibberish and sticking flowers in your hair and throwing yourself in a lake. The king was a nasty man, and Rosencrantz and Guildenstern were mean and horrid. Horatio was the only real friend Hamlet had, and that rickety Polonius couldn't tell his son half as much about life as Ben could. The ghost made you feel creepy, and some of the children squealed, but she knew it was only an actor. The gravedigger was supposed to be a funny man, but he wasn't in it with Uncle Boojum. All in all, though, it was worth Seeing once. Shakespeare wrote it. Claire Ensley had been invited to be Virginia's guest for dinner, and for the night, and that was fun too, because after they went to bed, they could talk in loud whispers. Virginia told Claire all about Ben and Wicky and Mary Sunshine, now that it wasn't a secret any more. Claire was interested, but she was afraid of tramps, and she admitted she would be scared to go down to the Arroyo Bottom alone, or even with Virginia, for that matter. "Pooh," said Virginia. "I wasn't. They're just like anybody else." The Mary Sunshine part made Claire giggle so loud that Mother came in and told them it was time for little girls to go to sleep. After Mother had gone out again, Claire whispered, "Didn't she wear anything? Not even one single stitch." "Not a stitch," whispered Virginia. "And she was one of the finest women in the world." Claire giggled again. "When I grow up, I'm going to be just like her," whispered Virginia. Claire had to stuff part of the pillow in her mouth to keep from giggling. Virginia enjoyed a feeling of deep satisfaction. Once she too had giggled, when Ben first told her about Mary Sunshine. But now she knew better. Mary quite contrary. Mary the candy maker and Mary Sunshine. "What did your mother say when she found out about it?" whispered Claire. "She only knows about Ben and Wicky," whispered Virginia. "She doesn't know about Mary Sunshine and the rest of the tramps." "Was she mad?" "Kind of, at first. Then she reevaluated." "What?" "Changed her mind." "How?" "She thinks it was the cutest thing, but she doesn't know I know it." "But you can't go down there any more, can you?" "No, they'd be mad again. I promised. They'd be awful mad if I broke my promise." The whispers were getting unconsciously louder, reaching stage proportions. "Did you get punished?" asked Claire. "No, I got a bracelet," whispered Virginia. "Gee, you have nice parents," whispered Claire. "They're modern," whispered Virginia. "Are yours?" "Not like that." "Oh, say," whispered Virginia. "Has your cousin got a bracelet?" "Kathy?" "Yes." "I don't know." "Why?" "It doesn't make any material difference." Claire began to giggle, and again she had to resort to stuffing the end of the pillow slip in her mouth. "What's so funny?" whispered Virginia. "I was just thinking," gasped Claire, between stifled chortles, "how funny material difference would look if she dressed like Mary Sunshine." Then they both squealed and giggled until Mother had to come in again. "What's going on in here?" asked Mother. Daddy called to Mother. "Ask them if they've heard the one about the traveling salesman and the farmer's daughter." Both Claire and Virginia giggled at that, but they didn't know why. "Now, if I hear any more of this," said Mother, "there's going to be trouble. You'll have to go to sleep in the guest room, Virginia." "We'll be quiet, Miss Stewart," whispered Claire. "We'll be quiet, Mother," whispered Virginia. "It's not quiet I want," said Mother. "It's sleep. Now you be good girls. Good night." "Good night, good night." Mother went out and closed the door. "Maybe if I got up," whispered Claire, "and smashed a window, they'd give me a bracelet too." This brought on a series of choked and throttled convulsions, but eventually they could wring no more humor out of it, and finally went to sleep. Sunday, too, was a busy day, for it had been arranged that Virginia would be Claire's guest. After breakfast, they went to the Ensley house, and Mr. and Mrs. Ensley took them to the beach club for the afternoon. It was 8 o'clock Sunday night before Virginia was taken home, and goodbyes were said, and for all practical purposes the weekend was over. Virginia went to bed and read The Ugly Dachshund until it was time to turn out the light. Monday began like any other Monday. Mother called her as usual, and she dressed and had breakfast and went off to school. It was during study hour, when the classroom was quiet and the regular tick-clunk of the minute hand of the clock, jumping into a new position every minute, was the only loud noise in the room. And as that tick-clunked every minute, you never noticed it, that she vaguely recalled having dreamt the night before. It had been a positive and real dream, and now it was lost in a fog of hazy memory. The garden was in it, something about the asters and sunshine and growing things. How had that been? It was funny about dreams, unless you went over them in your mind. As soon as you woke up, you forgot them, and it was almost impossible to recollect them. But at that time it had been a wonderful dream, and it had carried a sensation of pleasure because what had that been about? Garden, asters, playhouse, and Ben. That was it. Ben was in it. Not only was he in the dream, but he was in the garden doing something to the asters. Of course, he loved asters, and he could spell chrysanthemum by syllables. Wicky had come up from the arroyo to chase the gophers and the snails away. Benton was working in the garden. He had an old battered Ford full of garden tools. It was a Dashi's Ford, but somehow it belonged to Ben. Tick-clunk. He was working in the rich earth, and all the flowers were growing because of the California sunshine. It was really merry sunshine, but only she and Ben knew it. Ben knew just what to do with the trowel, and the hoe, and the rake, and the hose, and the sunshine. He was busy every minute, and so was Wicky. And Mother and Daddy came walking through the garden, and were simply delighted with the way things were growing. Daddy stopped and knocked on the door of the playhouse, and Ben opened the door. Why, he lived in the playhouse, and Daddy said it was well done, and Ben said yes, indeedy, but it would look even better pretty soon. And Mother told Celia that Ben must always have plenty to eat, and he never left the garden, but kept on working until he had made a whole forest of flowers out of it, some as high as the house itself. Tick-clunk. It had been a lovely dream. There was a lot more to it, but it was impossible to remember it all. The important thing was that Ben had charge of the garden, and lived in the playhouse. And why couldn't he? The playhouse wasn't very big, that was true, but it was just about as big as the house he had now. And why couldn't Ben be the gardener? Mother didn't like Adashi, and she had said something about getting a new gardener. Why couldn't the new one be Ben? That would solve everything. Ben's trouble, her trouble, the gardener trouble. Maybe Ben didn't know how to garden, but he could learn. It didn't take any sense. Mother said about all Adashi did was turn the water on and off. Ben could do that, and a lot more than that. It was a great idea, and it might solve everything. It would solve everything. Tick-clunk. What time was it? Almost 3 o'clock. Pretty soon she'd be on her way home. The whole idea was exciting, and the remaining half-hour crawled along like a snail. A garden snail of the kind Wiki and Ben would soon be chasing out of the asters. Why hadn't she thought of this before? It was so simple. Anybody would have thought of it. That was the way with great ideas, Daddy said. The simpler they were, the harder they were to think of. 3 o'clock. Material Difference would talk about American history for half an hour, and then she'd be free to hurry home and get this great plan started. She listened to an explanation of the difficulties encountered by Martin Van Buren during his term of office, but she remembered very little about them. He had been president after Andrew Jackson. Do you suppose either one of them could garden? From the end of the streetcar line, she skipped along Palm Drive. Martin Van Buren and Andrew Jackson were forgotten. The man of the hour was now Adashi. This was one of his days. Yes, his battered Ford was in the drive, and he was squatting down on his heels, hacking away at the can of stocks. A glance at the garage showed that Mother was home because her coupe was in. Adashi, can anybody be a gardener? Yes, he said. Do you have to learn it? No, he said. Don't you get tired of working for us? Yes, he said. That's good, because I think we'll get another gardener. He stopped hacking and looked up at her. No like, he asked. Oh yes, we like you. We might even keep you for a while, until Ben learns all the things you're supposed to do. Adashi sat back on his heels and frowned slightly. Mr. Stewart, no like. Sure, but we're thinking of making a change. You go on working. We're not going to change today. She walked to the rear and looked down into the chaparral. The next thing was to tell Ben the good news, and that was going to be hard to do. She couldn't go down there and tell him. She had promised not to do that. In the old days, it would have been so easy. Why hadn't she thought of this weeks ago? My, that was dumb. She stared below. Adashi frowned. His work must be unsatisfactory. He'd better be a little careful. Miss Virginia must have heard Mr. and Mrs. Stewart talking about him. It didn't sound like a joke. She seemed to mean it. He'd better do an extra fine job today. Maybe take Miss Stewart in some flowers. Might see, maybe so. He returned to the cannas. Virginia stayed in the garden until it began to get dark. She bounded back and forth between the playhouse and the rear hedge, and she kept a close watch on the path across the lot, but nobody appeared. Oh yes, a stranger, a shabby-looking man, went by once and went on down the trail. He gave the house a long look as he went by. He didn't count. Of course it would be possible to go into the house and lay the whole thing before Mother. That was one way, but that was dangerous. If Mother didn't like the idea at once, she wouldn't listen to it, and to have told her would do more harm than good. To tell Daddy, too, might result in a failure. The way to do it was to keep the careless work of Adachi in their minds, have a talk with Ben about it, and then have Ben ask Daddy for the job. Ben was the key to the whole thing. He'd have to do it himself, after she told him how. My, but Adachi's careless, Virginia said at dinner. What's he done now? Asked Daddy. Oh, he sat down right on a lot of flowers, said Virginia. Really, said Mother. He was unusually polite today. Just before he went home, he came to the back door and gave Celia some lovely zinnias for me. Those are some of them on the table, and he sent in a message wanting to know if everything was all right. Must be Japanese New Year, said Daddy. What did you tell him? Asked Virginia. I told Celia to tell him everything was all right. You did? Virginia was shocked. Why, certainly, said Mother. But don't you want to get another gardener? Asked Virginia. Not especially, said Mother. But Mother, eat your dinner, said Mother. Oh, but I think we ought to get a new gardener. What's poor Adachi done to you? Asked Daddy. That you want to cut his head off. But Mother, you said the place was full of snails, and the other day we found a great big gopher hole. That's why gopher traps were made, said Daddy. If the snails don't go away, I'll tell Adachi to spread some poison, said Mother. Eat your dinner, darling. You know you like turnips the way Celia fixes them. Well, said Virginia, I think our garden is the worst-looking garden in town. I'll get you a rake and a hoe, said Daddy, and you can improve it. Why, the Insleys have a much better garden than we have, declared Virginia. They have an American gardener. Miss Inslee says they're much better than Japanese. Ralph's back from San Francisco, said Daddy. Did he fly back? No, train. Luther Burbank was an American, said Virginia. So are 120 million others, said Daddy. Are you having gardening in school? Asked Mother. No, just for dinner, said Daddy. It was no use. They wouldn't be serious. They didn't even want to talk about it. She dropped the subject, but she wasn't going to give it up. She wouldn't think of doing that. The only thing to do was to find some way of seeing Ben and have a talk with him. He might have some ideas of his own, or something might happen to Adachi. If he fell off the Arroyo cliff, he couldn't garden for a while, could he? But Adachi never went near the cliff. It was quite a problem. She ate her turnips, and listened to Mother and Daddy's conversation, without paying much attention to it. There was some way to fix this. There must be. She would find the way. But the way was not easy to find. The promise blocked her. The one hope was to wait and watch after school. Watch from the end of the streetcar line, and wait in the garden in order to get a glimpse of Ben. Monday there had been no sign of him. Tuesday there was no sign of him. Somebody was down there, though, because a thin wisp of smoke curled up from the chaparral late in the afternoon. It came from a point that was unmistakably the location of Ben's house. Why didn't Ben come up? Wasn't he ever going to use the trail across the lot any more? Possibly he came and went by the trail down the arroyo toward the Rose Bowl and the Colorado Street Bridge. Could it be that he was never coming up this way anymore? Ben, why can't you understand? Please come up, Ben. Mary Sunshine, make him come up. Tuesday night, Mother and Daddy were out for the evening, and Virginia remained in with her homework and Celia. Her English assignment called for the writing of a model letter to a friend who lived in a distant city. She wrote instead a letter to Ben, telling him how she missed him and Wiki, and how lonely she was. She explained about the garden, and how he could become their gardener. Then she put the letter aside and wrote another one. In the second letter, Ben was in a distant city, and she was writing in order to tell him that if he came to Pasadena, Daddy would give him a job taking care of the garden, and he could fix up the playhouse and live in it. The second letter was better. The first one didn't fit the assignment, but the second one was good enough to hand in to Material Difference. She folded the paper and wrote on the outside, Virginia Stewart, English, 7th grade, letter to a friend. She ought to get an A for it. She was sure there were no mistakes in it. Celia had been sitting nearby, darning socks, but presently she stood up and peered out the French doors. The light in the room made it impossible for her to distinguish anything below in the garden. "What's the matter?" asked Virginia. "Thought I heard something movin' down there," said Celia. "Who? Can't see nothin' at all," said Celia. "Let's turn out the light and go out on the balcony," said Virginia. "If there's somebody prowlin' around the garage, I ain't goin' to stick my head out," declared Celia. "Let 'em prowl." Virginia stood beside Celia, and together they tried to peer out of the lighted room. "Maybe just a dog smellin' around," said Celia. "'Tain't nothin' for you to get scared about." "Ho, I'm not scared," said Virginia, "and with good reason, for if there were anybody prowling around the garden, she had a good idea who it might be. Ben might have come up in the security of the darkness. He was probably wondering what on earth had happened to her, why she had not met him at the streetcar line last week, as they had planned, and why she had suddenly stopped coming down to the arroyo bottom. He wouldn't be able to understand. Probably he was worried and thought she was sick in bed. If so, she wanted him to know better, and if it was Ben down there in the darkness, there was one way to let him know that while things were not what they used to be, she was all right. They had a signal, and that signal had worked before. Possibly Ben was down there wondering about it and waiting for it. "I'm going out on the balcony," she said to Celia. "You better stay in here." "You be careful what you do," said Celia. "Don't lean over the rail." "I couldn't fall over," said Virginia, "and even if I did, I couldn't hurt myself." "You come right back in again," said Celia. Virginia opened one of the French doors and stepped outside. The balcony was about 10 feet in length and 3 feet in width, and had a railing around it almost as high as her chest. She leaned over the rail and looked below into the darkness. There was a half-moon rising in the east, and after a few seconds its light enabled her to distinguish the general contour of the garden 10 feet below. Vague, dark strips that were the paths, the dark form of the surrounding hedge, and over to the left the whitish mass of stucco that was the garage. Resting her elbows on the cold wood of the railing, she whistled the first 3 notes of the chorus of "Over There." No answer. Silence. "You better come inside," called Celia. Once again, "Over there." She couldn't have said so for sure, but she thought a vague form disappeared around the corner of the garage into the darkness, where there was no moonlight. It could have been Ben. It didn't whistle back. But even so, it might have been Ben, understanding and going home. "Miss Ginia, please come inside," called Celia. "'Tain't no place to go makin' music." Virginia turned from the balcony and went back into her room. Celia closed the door. "Did you see something down there?" "No, not a thing." "I think you were right, Celia. It was a dog smelling around." "Dog nothing. It was almost certainly Ben. How nice of him to have come up to see if she was all right." "Maybe so," said Celia, "but I don't like the feel of it. I think I'll go downstairs and turn on the outside floodlights until Mr. and Mrs. Stewart gets home." "Oh, you don't have to do that," said Virginia. "Well, yes, let her do it. It couldn't do any harm, because Ben would be halfway down the trail before she could get the lights on. If you're scared, there are some crooks out there, like the Green Hornet, on the radio. Maybe you'd better go turn the lights on." "I aim to," said Celia seriously. She went downstairs and snapped a switch in the front hall, illuminating the front yard and the drive, and then walked through the house to the back porch, where a switch controlled a floodlight for the rear garden. Once both outside lights were on, Celia felt better. She went back upstairs and said, "It's bedtime for you anyway." "That clock's fast, Celia." "No, it ain't fast. It's slow." They went through the familiar routine, and when all the usual excuses had been nullified, Virginia undressed and went to bed. She was asleep long before Mother and Daddy came home, and she didn't even hear them come in. Mother woke up Celia to inquire about the outside lights, and Celia explained that it was only a precaution against prowlers, but when Mother and Daddy discovered that neither Celia nor Virginia had seen any prowlers, the incident was forgotten. "I guess it was a dog," said Virginia, in a sleepy voice, to Mother, who was bending over her. "Then go back to sleepy bye," said Mother, giving her a kiss. That was Tuesday. Wednesday brought no further development in the Ben for Gardener campaign. The exercise, a letter to a friend, did not get an A, but a B. Miss Roberts explained that the friend in the distant city should have been written to as a personal friend, and not instructed in the matter of acquiring employment as a gardener. Virginia did not protest, but apparently here was one instance in which Miss Roberts could find something that did make some material difference. Claire Ensley had written a conventional letter and had received an A. Well, Virginia would get an A on the next exercise, no doubt. Wednesday afternoon, Mother was at El Encanto Country Club for the bridge tournament, and Adachi was in the garden. It was aggravating to come home and find him digging and watering when it was Ben who should by all rights be doing it. With Celia busy in the kitchen, and Adashi busy in the garden, and neither Mother nor Daddy at home, it was tempting indeed to step over the hedge and hurry down the trail. In only a few minutes, a very few minutes, she could be at Ben's house, and how delighted they would be to see each other after a whole week. But she had promised Mother and Daddy, expected her to keep that promise, and she intended to keep it. But at an opportunity like this, it was no easy thing to do. There was the hedge, and beyond it was the cliff and the trail. No, she mustn't think about that. It was too much of a temptation. She'd better go into the house. No, if she went in the house, Ben might cross the lot, and she'd miss him. Better stay out here, but not too close to the trail. Why was it like this? Why were things all wrong this way? What could she do about it? What would somebody else do in her position? What would Mary Sunshine do? The sun went down, and she gave up the afternoon as hopeless and went in the house. Daddy's paper was waiting for him in the living room. There was a little girl's picture on the front page. She was a year or so younger than Virginia, aged 9, it said. Joanne Stevens was her name. That was a nice name, Joanne. She turned to the funnies. They weren't very funny. Before she finished them, Mother's coupe came up the drive, and she dashed out and met Mother at the garage. They returned to the house together, and Mother told her about the bridge party at El Encanto Country Club, but she had forgotten to bring her the favors. "I'm so sorry," said Mother. "Oh, I don't care," said Virginia. "They weren't very good this time anyway," Mother explained. "Did you win?" "No, I was runner-up," said Mother. It was interesting. To be runner-up always sounded more exciting than to be winner. There was something athletic about it. Runner-up. She always pictured Mother crouched, ready to break into a sprint. Runner-up didn't mean as much as winner, but then lieutenant was a nicer word than captain. Sometimes there was more to a thing than just winning. "You going out tonight?" "No, sweet. Mr. and Mrs. Hilton are coming in." "Don't you see the Harmons any more?" "Why, yes, of course. We're going to see them next week." "Why?" "I just wondered." Daddy came home a few minutes later. He sat in the living room and read the evening paper. Mother and Virginia went in to see him. "What do you suppose," he said, "has been living right under our garden?" "What?" asked Mother. "A veritable hobo jungle." "A jungle?" "That's what tramps call a squatting place. I had a report from the Department of Public Health today, and there are half a dozen vagrants living down in the arroyo bottom." "Great heavens," said Mother. "What are they going to do about it?" "There's a way to get rid of them," said Daddy. He gave Virginia a look. She was listening, poker-faced. "Why, darling," said Mother to Virginia, "did you know there was more than one tramp down there?" "Oh, I saw some others," said Virginia. But you never told Mother that before. Well, I hardly ever saw them, only once or twice. I'm certainly glad we found it out, said Mother. Incredible, said Daddy, glancing at the newspaper. Right here in the heart of Pasadena. And if it hadn't been for Virginia, there's no telling how long or how many of them would have congregated down there. I suppose it was a very snug little hideout, absolutely isolated, warm and protected, and yet right in the heart of a residential district. Think of the sanitary conditions, said Mother. Goodness, what's the Board of Health going to do? Daddy looked up from the newspaper. They'll, take the proper steps to alleviate the, condition, he said. He looked at Virginia. It's nothing serious. They won't hurt the tramps. Virginia showed no especial interest in the conversation. Mother was the only one excited. I hope they do something about it at once, she declared. We can't have that going on. No, we can't, agreed Daddy. Listen to this. Child missing. Joanne Stevens, aged 9, has been missing from her home for 24 hours. And then it goes along, blah, blah, blah. And then it says, last seen in the company of an unidentified man, probably a transient, on Redondo Boulevard. Poor little thing's probably been kidnapped, said Mother. Are the parents wealthy? No, the father's a grocery clerk in Inglewood, so it's not a ransom case. Daddy turned to Virginia. But you see, sweet, how dangerous it is to have anything to do with tramps. That little girl's parents may never see her again. Yes, said Virginia quietly, and while we know nothing like that is going to happen to you, nevertheless, the tramps have got to go. Where will they go? Oh, just keep moving on somewhere. Who cares where they go, said Mother, as long as they get out. When will they get out? Asked Virginia. Oh, in a matter of a few days, said Daddy casually. It has to be done systematically. She didn't ask any more questions about it, and Mother and Daddy changed the subject. Mother suggested that she run upstairs and wash her hands before dinner. She went slowly, thoughtfully, and before she was halfway up the stairs, she knew that Mother and Daddy had begun talking about the tramps again. She didn't stop to listen, but continued on to her room. Things had come to a pretty pass. Ben would have to move, most any day now. Daddy had said nobody would hurt the tramps. Could she be sure of that? She went to the bathroom and mechanically washed her hands. It was a very serious problem. Something was going to happen. Something would have to be done about it. Did Ben know anything about it yet? She hadn't seen him for a week, but then she was sure he had come up to the garden last night and heard her signal. Nobody else would bother to come up to the garden at night like that. When you were faced with a problem, you did something. You had to find some way to solve it, but you had to do it with sense, not just butt your nose against it like Wiki and the honey bottle, until you had a nervous breakdown. You had to find the way to get the cork out, then there wouldn't be any problem. So there must be some way to solve this. But where was the cork? The wisest man in the world would know. So would the wisest woman. So would Mary Sunshine. Where was the cork? 24 hours later, all forces converged, and the crisis was reached. and the person who had most to do with it was a person who had never heard of Ben or Wiki, and who had never been down in the arroyo, and who was no party whatsoever to the circumstances. It was Miss Joanne Stevens. Virginia saw the headlines and skimmed over the gruesome details, interested only casually and not attaching at first any relative significance to the tragic fate of Miss Joanne Stevens with her own immediate problem. She was mildly surprised at Mother's horrified reaction to the newspaper. All of that had happened in a suburb called Inglewood, miles away on the other side of Los Angeles, and all the people were strangers. Odd how perturbed Mother had become. People got killed in automobile accidents every day, and Mother never even bothered to read about them. You might think this had happened across the street. Oh, of course, when you looked at the paper, you could see that a lot more had been printed about it than there is printed about the daily accidents, and pictures of the girl's parents, and the house she lived in, and a picture of a ravine, and a drawing of a man who was wanted by the police, and who was supposed to look something like the picture in the paper. It was startling in a way, but it had nothing to do with Ben and Wiki and the arroyo until Daddy came home. He had another paper, an extra. It seemed that they had caught the man. He was a transient who lived in a shack near the schoolyard, said Daddy. Think of those parents, said Mother, how they must feel. This is going to start a cleanup campaign, the like of which Southern California has never seen before, said Daddy, putting down the paper. It's about time, said Mother. Just think what a close call we had with Virginia. Why, it isn't safe to let your children out of your sight. What'll they do to this man? Oh, he'll go to the gallows, said Daddy, unless a mob of citizens gets him first. Save the state some money if they did. Mother reached out and pulled Virginia close to her. Darling, darling, she said, my poor little Virginia. Virginia wondered what there was about her that was poor. Every hobo jungle in Los Angeles County is going to be wiped out, said Daddy. I had Fletcher on the phone today, and he gave me his word that he'd start with this one right here in the arroyo. Thank goodness, said Mother. It was coming anyway, but this horrible case has hurried it up. The first thing tomorrow morning, a crew of men will go in there with gasoline torches and axes, and they'll smash the shacks and set fire to the chaparral and drive the hobos out. They'll level the place, and there won't be a stick left standing. Virginia listened, open-mouthed. When everything is burnt to a crisp, they'll take a couple of tractors in there and plow the land up so that the underbrush won't grow back. It's a fire hazard, and a sanitation hazard, and a child hazard, the way it is now, but it'll be a blazing inferno tomorrow morning. That's a relief, declared Mother. She continued to hold Virginia close to her. But Daddy, yes, my sweet, what about the men who live there? They'll run like rats, said Daddy, when they see what's going to happen, or they can stay there and be burnt to death, and nobody would care. "Oh, but what if they don't know in time?" Now, darling," said Mother, "you mustn't worry over something that is no concern of yours. Hobos expect to be driven away every so often, but Daddy said they might be burned to death." "I'm afraid they won't," said Mother. "They'll scurry out," said Daddy. "Don't you give them a thought." "We'll talk about something else," said Mother. "You tell us about something interesting that happened today." And to Daddy she said, "I'm so glad you talked to Fletcher. What a relief." Fletcher? Who was Fletcher? But what did it matter who was Fletcher? What mattered was Ben and Wicky. Mother and Daddy and Fletcher wanted Ben and Wicky burned to death, and it was going to happen. First thing tomorrow morning. Daddy had said. What chance would Ben have? Ben would be asleep in his little house, and all of a sudden the gasoline torches would turn it into a blazing inferno. He would wake up, and all around him would be flames. He'd try to find Wicky and dash out of the house, but the smoke would choke him, and the flames would burn him, and he'd die, writhing in agony in the midst of the fire, calling for help, while the policemen stood around and poured gasoline on him. She remembered the way Material Difference explained about Joan of Arc. Instead of the Maid of Orleans in the flames, it would be Ben trying to hold Wicky above the fire, struggling to the very last, until the flames burned them both, screaming to death. "Oh, Mother," gasped Virginia. "Why, it's nothing, darling," said Mother. "Nothing at all." "Nothing at all," cried Virginia. "Nothing at all to be burned, screaming to death, while policemen stood around and laughed. Nothing at all." She burst into tears and turned and ran out of the room and upstairs. At the same moment Celia announced dinner. "Well," exclaimed Mother in amazement. She looked at Daddy and asked, "Now what do you make of that?" Daddy looked at her, concerned but helpless. "Well, I'll have to go speak to her," said Mother. "We can't allow that to go on." "Better be careful," said Daddy. "There's more to this than we realized." "Why, she's never created a scene before in her life," said Mother. "I'll be right down." She found Virginia lying face down in her bed, crying into her pillow. "Virginia," said Mother firmly. "Don't touch me," sobbed Virginia, into the pillow. "Don't come near me." "Very well," said Mother, "since that's how you feel. When you get control of yourself, bathe your eyes and come down to dinner." When there was no response, she asked, "Do you hear me?" Incoherent gurgles and a nod of the head indicated that Virginia had heard, but she hadn't made any effort to get up when Mother left the room and went down to dinner. "Miss Virginia will be late," Mother said to Celia. At dinner they talked of the activities of the Civic Opera Committee, of which Mother had recently been made chairman, and a dinner party given by the Hiltons, and the feasibility of driving into Los Angeles next week to hear John Charles Thomas, because he was one of the few concert singers Daddy liked. But they gave little attention to the conversation, and Celia finally directed the trend of thought by asking, "Is that child coming down for her dinner?" "I don't know," said Mother. "We got her favorite dessert," said Celia. "Deep dish berry pie and ice cream." "Suppose you go up and tell her, Celia." "Yes'm." "I thought," began Daddy, "that she had forgotten all the tramp business. It's been almost 2 weeks, and you've taken her places, and the little Inslee girl has been here. But apparently it goes a lot deeper than we thought it did. I never thought we'd raise a problem child," said Mother. "How can she be so concerned over that awful old man?" "Don't mention it in front of her," said Daddy, "under any circumstances." "She's comin' down," said Celia as she passed through to the kitchen. "Shouldn't she have some dinner before dessert?" asked Daddy. "Not if she doesn't want it," said Mother. "There's good food content in Celia's deep dish pie and ice cream. If she wants something later on, I'll fix her a cup of soup." Virginia came into the dining room and took her place at the table. Her eyes were red, and she sniffled once, but she had control of herself. "Won't we have a feast?" said Daddy. Virginia nodded. There was never a surfeit of a deep dish berry pie with ice cream. Daddy and Virginia always wished they could eat more than their appetites and stomachs would allow. But this time, as Celia held the dish and Daddy served himself, Celia said, "'Fraid I got my crust just a little too well done for Mr. Stewart. Got it out just in time, or I like to burnt it." "It looks very nice, Celia," Daddy said. Celia came to Virginia and held the dish while Virginia struggled with the awkward serving knife and fork and heaped the pastry on her plate. She took her usual large portion and heaped the white ice cream on top of it. With the first mouthful she could taste the slightly burnt crust. Burnt to a crust. That's what it was, burnt alive to a crust. "She did get it too well done," said Daddy to Mother. "Her crust is burnt." Virginia choked. The first big mouthful would not go down. She gulped and her cheeks puffed out, and she struggled to swallow. It wouldn't go down. "You can't eat anything that is burnt." She looked up helplessly. "Virginia, what is the matter?" asked Mother. Virginia was incoherent. Ben and Wiki would be burnt to a crust. Suddenly she had a mouthful of Ben and Wiki. "Use your napkin. Leave the table," said Mother. "Don't just sit there, darling, looking ill." "What's the matter with her?" Daddy asked. "Go out in the kitchen," said Mother. Virginia pushed back her chair and hurried out to the kitchen. When she had lost the mouthful of berry pie and ice cream, she felt better, and then almost immediately worse. "Don't go bein' sick there," said Celia. "Go in my bathroom if you got to be sick." Virginia clung to the kitchen sink. "Oh my," she gasped. "Oh goodness, I'm not sick. I don't know why She took a few breaths through her mouth, and tears ran down her cheeks. Mother came out from the dining room. "What struck you, Virginia? Did you swallow something the wrong way?" Virginia sighed, and 2 more tears trickled down her face. "I'm not sick now. I was just sick all of a sudden." "Well, what are you crying for? You mustn't cry. Is something wrong with you, darling?" "No, Mother. If you feel badly, you tell me." "I'll feel all right in a minute. Give me a towel, Celia," said Mother. "Yes'm." Mother dried Virginia's eyes and rubbed her mouth. "What a strange thing to happen to you," she said. "I think you must have swallowed too big a mouthful the wrong way. Now take a little water and get your breath back. That's nothing to cry about." Virginia swallowed some water. Isn't that better? Are you all right now? Yes, Mother. Why, that's the strangest thing, said Mother. If you feel all right, you may go back to the table. Poor Daddy's eating all by himself. They returned to the dining room, and Virginia sat and stared at the ice cream and berry pie. There was no use in trying to eat it. She didn't even make any pretense of wanting it. Delicious, said Daddy. I'm surprised at you. Virginia held her breath as long as possible. Eventually, Daddy finished, and dinner was over, and they could leave the table. Where are you going, dear? Mother asked. I have to study for a history test, said Virginia. From Madison to Van Buren. I think I'll go do it. All right, said Mother. I'll be up after a while. In her room, Virginia closed the door and went at once to the balcony. Outside, everything was dark. There was no moon at this time, and it was impossible to distinguish much below. She stared over the balcony into the darkness. There was soft green grass beneath the balcony. Even if she couldn't see it, she knew it was there. It was only about 10 feet below. Even if you fell off the balcony, it couldn't hurt you if you landed on your feet on the grass. She took a deep breath of the cool night air and turned back into her room and closed the door. She wasn't ill now. That sick feeling in her insides had gone. Guts, she said. She patted her stomach. Guts. Tex had said that insides were guts. It was a relief not to feel ill. Shock and panic had left her. She was able to think about it now. She intended to stay here alone in her own room in order to think. It was almost 8 o'clock. 12 hours from now, the arroyo would be a black, charred, smoldering ruin. Perhaps as early as 6 o'clock in the morning, they would go in there with their axes and gasoline torches and turn it into a blazing inferno. If so, there were only 10 hours grace. Suppose Ben wasn't home in the morning. Often in the mornings he had made his visits to the city dump in order to collect things. He had gotten into the habit of doing that so that he would be home in the afternoons when she went down the trail. Ben might get out tomorrow morning before the enemy arrived. He would be away most of the day, and he'd be safe. That was a possibility. But goodness, if he did that, he would leave Wiki at home in his cage. He would return to find the place burned to cinders, and Wiki burned to death. The twisted, battered wreck of the cage would be there in a pile of hot ashes, and the poor burned body of Wiki inside it. No, that could never be. That must not be allowed to happen. Ben must know. He must know in time. How? She could make some pretense of having to see Claire. Inslee. She could say that she had to go over to Claire's house right now in order to ask Claire something about the history test. And then she could slip down the trail in the dark and tell Ben what was going to happen. She needn't go to Claire's at all. Then Mother and Daddy wouldn't know. That would be breaking her promise. But no, that wouldn't work. Mother would suggest that she telephone to Claire. She would never let her walk around to Claire's house in the dark. Something else. What? She could say that she wanted to talk to Celia about something. She could go through the kitchen to Celia's room and then slip out the back door, rush through the garden and down the trail, warn Ben, and rush home. But that was impossible. That meant breaking the promise, and Mother would never swallow that stuff about wanting to talk to Celia. Virginia never went to Celia's room. Mother would know at once that there was something up. No, there must be some other way. What? Mother was tapping on the door. "May I come in?" she called. Yes. Mother walked into the room. "Are you all right, darling?" "Me? Oh, sure, I'm all right." "You're not sick?" "Oh, no, Mother, not a bit. I just wanted to be sure. I was about to study some history." Mother sat down. "Go right ahead. Don't let me disturb you," she said. Virginia reached for the American history book. There was nothing else to do. Why didn't Mother go downstairs? She never came in like this and just sat. Virginia read. James Madison was inaugurated in 1809. She read on, sentence after sentence, none of which conveyed any meaning at all. After a long time, Mother got up and walked quietly to the door. "Go right on with your lessons," she said. "I'm going down to Daddy. I think you're all right." "Oh, yes, Mother." Again, Virginia was alone. The hour that Mother had sat there while she had pretended to study history had been only 10 minutes. It wasn't yet 8:30. 8:30 at night to 6 o'clock in the morning. 9.5 hours grace. James Madison, she read, was inaugurated in 1809. The best that could possibly be hoped for was that Ben and Wicky would wake early, see the flames, and run out of the chaparral. That was one possibility, but even then they would be forced to leave the arroyo forever. She would never see either of them again. Ben would never know about the gardener idea. It wasn't right to abandon all that. It was a grand scheme, and it deserved a trial. It must have a trial. And was it all so bad after all, this going down to the arroyo? When Mother hadn't known she was listening, Mother had said to Miss Harmon, "It was the cutest thing." Was something that was the cutest thing really so bad? If it was nothing more dreadful than cute, should it be an inviolable promise never to do it again? James Madison was inaugurated in 1809. She read on about the War of 1812 and the writing of the Star-Spangled Banner and the capture of Washington by the British troops. It was funny about the War of 1812. The United States really lost it, but the way it was told, you'd think it had been a great victory. Yet the book admitted that the war was badly managed and unpopular with many, and that an enemy force routed the Americans and captured Washington and then set fire to it and burnt it. Did that sound like a great victory? They burnt it. That's what they did. Set fire to it and burnt it. Oh, Ben, Ben, Ben. At 9 o'clock, Mother came in again. "I'm not sick," said Virginia, before Mother was in the room. "It's just about bedtime," said Mother, "and I've brought you a cup of hot broth and some wafers. Doesn't that sound good?" "Yes, Mother. Drink it slowly. It tastes good." "That's nice. Are you through with your lessons?" "I guess so." When the broth was gone, Virginia went to bed. After she was tucked in, Mother was in no hurry to leave. She seemed to know that Virginia was preoccupied with things other than American history. But whenever they talked, Virginia sent Ben and Wicky back into the place where she was alone, and they spoke of Dolly Madison. "I always thought she was a cake," said Virginia. "She was the first lady of the land," said Mother. "Perhaps when you grow up, you'll be the first lady." "Think so?" "Somebody has to be," said Mother. "My husband's probably flying a kite," said Virginia. Mother laughed, and seemed to think the remark was clever. But it was Ben who had said it originally. It just went to show how Mother would appreciate Ben if only she knew him. They talked on at random until the sentences became desultory, and Virginia was not aware of Mother's tiptoeing out of the room. She slept for several hours, a fitful, troubled sleep, haunted with irrational dreams of fires, and demons, and devils, and smoke, and brimstone. A dozen blocks away a siren whined, coming closer, and then fading again. Virginia sat up with a start. The house was on fire. No, it wasn't. Ben's house was on fire. No, it was still night, and she was in bed. Nothing was on fire, not yet, but that noise. It was the siren of a fire engine, or maybe an ambulance, going away, not coming nearer, going, not coming. Her heart was beating fast, and her throat was parched. It must be the middle of the night. She found the clock on the night table beside her bed, and turned it in order to see the luminous dial. 12:15. 6 hours grace. James Madison was inaugurated in 1809. Now what did he have to do with it? Oh yes, history. She had been studying history. Her mouth was dry, and she considered getting up and getting a drink of water. Was everybody asleep? Probably. And down in the arroyo, was everybody asleep? Probably. None of them even guessed that with the dawn creeping up on them, surrounding them were men with axes and gasoline torches. Suppose Ben never woke up at all, and she could have warned him. She should have warned him. She had thought of plans for telling him, the Claire Ensley plan and the Celia plan. She should have tried one of them. Anyone, all of them. Now it was too late. She sat up in bed, wide awake, and listened. Everything was still now. Even the whine of the distant siren was gone. Ben might die, and if he did, it would be her fault. Nobody else's, just hers. She was the one to help him, and she had failed him. Not yet. There was a chance yet. But that promise. What could you do about that promise? Should you break a sacred promise to Mother and Daddy? Or should you let your best friend die? What would the wisest man in the world do? What would the wisest woman do? What would Mary Sunshine do? Mary, Mary, what shall I do? Virginia got out of bed. The door was open out on to the balcony. The moon had risen, and the deep blackness of the earlier night was touched with a silver glow. It was the same half-moon of the other night, and now it was directly overhead. Virginia whispered, "Mary, Mary, what shall I do? Please, please tell me. What would you do, Mary Sunshine? Please tell me, Mary." She stood quietly in the doorway to the balcony. She had stood that way once before, and pretended she had been Mary Sunshine. She'd try it again. Quickly she slipped out of her nightgown and tossed it over the bed. Then she stood naked in the cool breeze and whispered, "Mary, Mary, tell me, tell me, tell me, Mary, what to do." She tossed her head back and clenched her hands at her sides and closed her eyes tightly. Then she began to pivot round and around, supplicating constantly in a whisper, "Mary, Mary." She did this for a full minute, until the turning effect began to make her dizzy. She unclenched her palms and snapped her eyes open. She was staring straight out the door and over the balcony rail. That decided it. Mary meant her to go. Had she stopped turning and found herself staring inward toward the dark depths of the room, Mary would have meant stay. No, not stay, but go. Go tell him, go tell him, go tell him. Her movements now were rapid, but calm and quiet. It was settled. No matter what the outcome, it was settled. She found her clothes on a chair. Socks weren't necessary. Leave them. Shoes, no underwear, only essentials. She put on her white midi blouse and stepped into her navy blue skirt. Just those two garments were enough. Those and shoes. Nobody would know she didn't have on anything underneath. It wouldn't take long. With her shoes on, she had to walk lightly. And the night floors creaked in the most unexpected manner. Something they never did in the daytime. Creak. There it was. She stooped and undid her shoes and stepped out of them. Then, carrying the shoes in her hand, she walked in bare feet out onto the balcony. She leaned over the rail and dropped first one shoe and then the other. Only the slightest thud indicated they had landed on the grass below. She swung one leg over the rail, straddled it, and then clung to the outside. It was a drop into the darkness, but the moon gave some indication, and she knew exactly what lay below. In order to break the length of the drop, she grasped the rail with both hands and let her legs dangle into space, her back to the garden. The position was untenable. She could hold it for only a few seconds, and then her arms would tire. Through the railings of the balcony, she could see the dark, cavernous opening leading into her room. It was too late to go back now. It would be impossible to scramble up again. Gasping with the momentousness of what she was doing, she swung her body slightly outward, away from the face of the balcony, and let go.